They said the mountains were empty at night. They lied. I remember the first time I noticed the sound, thin and patient, like breath pressed against a window pane 100 yards away. It woke me before midnight, a rasping drag that didn't belong to wind or leaves. I lay on my back and listened, telling myself it was an animal, a neighbor, the house settling, anything to keep the pulse in my throat from climbing higher. The cabin was a sliver of light against a black wall of trees. Beyond that, the Appalachian ridges hunched like sleeping beasts. I had come here to leave the world, not to be swallowed by whatever waited inside. My name is Daniel. I moved here because silence promised clarity. No sirens, no fluorescent offices, only straight roads that ended at deep, old woods. For 3 months, the silence was honest. Mornings smelled of damp wood and instant coffee. Afternoons were sun-stung dust and the metallic taste of sweat. At night, the house exhaled. Pipes, the slow creak of beams, rain turning the world into a pulse under the roof. But the first time I heard that breath, soft and deliberate, it threaded into those normal sounds like a rotten seam. At first, the intrusions were small. A footprint on the porch when I was certain the door had been locked. One long, narrow print that sank into the dust as if whatever had made it had weight and an intent. A lantern left on the table, unlit where I never kept one. Once, a small smear of something dark on the rim of my sink. Not quite rust, not quite blood, dried into a crescent like a laugh. I told myself I'd been careless, clumsy with groceries, that animals had tracked dirt in. I wrote the incidents down, each entry precise and practical, like proof that reason still fit. But the thing that pierced me more than prints or stains was the eyes. Not my own. My neighbor's dog stared at me once in the lane, with a look that made my knees go soft, as if the animal had seen the surface of the world pull away. And later, through the half-light of dawn, I thought I saw a pale face in the dark of the trees. 2 round, hollowed, eyes reflecting a pinprick of moonlight. When I blinked, it was gone. When I told myself I had only imagined it, the silence answered with a small, dry click from somewhere beneath the porch. Sleep became a negotiation. I learned how to hold my breath until the house forgot I was there. I learned the precise distance at which a twig snap still sounded like a threat. I started leaving lights on in every room, absurdly defiant. Each night the quiet folded around me and, like a patient watcher, waited for me to slip. After the first night of staying awake, the days blurred into a slow rot. The small intrusions multiplied until I could no longer pretend they were accidents. The footprints became a ring around the cabin, as if something had paced me in measured steps and practiced patience. The smear in the sink reappeared, fresher each time, with the same crescent shape that made my stomach knot. Once I found a single tiny photograph tucked under the mat. Me, asleep in my bed, soft moonlight across my face. The date on the back read 3 nights from now. I should have left then. I stared at that scrap of glossy paper until dawn bled the edges away, and still I could not make myself move. It felt less like fear than a slow, hypothermic curiosity, the kind that draws you closer to the edge of a frozen pond. That evening, as if answering the photograph, the house began to imitate me. It opened cabinets when I thought of opening them. It paused mid-cry when I swallowed. I would call out and a voice, bright and wrong, would answer from somewhere in the rafters. My voice, answering in my own cadence but with a smile pressed against it. The sound came first, a child humming under its breath, the melody wrong in the middle like a sentence without a clause. I traced it to the cellar door, which I never opened, though the padlock was loose now. The smell that seeped up when I cracked it was not dirt, but something sweet and stale, like a room closed for decades. Down there, in the shallow light of my phone, I found toys stacked in a neat circle and a chair turned toward the wall. On the chair, an old-fashioned camera pointed at the doorway, its film spool half spent. When I picked it up, the camera made a small human sound, a click that could have been a laugh. Sleep became dangerous. I woke with tiny scratches along my forearms, thin and pale, as if someone had dragged fingernails across me to sketch punctuation. Once I woke choking on a smell I had never known before, iron and rain on hot stone. I found a line of footprints leading from my bedroom to the back door and into the dark that swallowed the porch. For a week, I followed them, only to find the prints stopped at the tree line. as if whatever made them had folded itself into bark. Then the tree answered me. It was late, and the world was a smear of breathing black. I heard my name called, soft like a neighbor hollering a favor, and I stepped out barefoot into the cold. The woods breathed around me, the underbrush hissed. A face leaned out between two trunks, pale and oiled, its eyes too wide and still. I recognized the shape of the mouth, the tiny scar at the corner of the lip. I knew, with a violence that made my knees give, that the face was a copy of my own in a mirror I hadn't yet broken. When I stumbled back, the face smiled and mouthed something I couldn't hear. In the silence afterward, the leaves kept a slow, satisfied clap. I thought I could feel the house rearranging itself even then, shifting the furniture like a body adjusting for comfort. I tried to tell the neighbor in the morning, but his words slid off me, sleepy and useless. He shrugged, and the dog that had once looked at me with understanding now stared past my shoulder with an expression of patient hunger. I began to find marks scratched into my walls in my handwriting. Leave, an extra line crossing the L until it looked almost like a plea. Then, beneath it, my own handwriting again, softer. I can't. Each letter was written in the small, decisive scrawl I used when I wrote lists, which convinced me I had scribbled them myself. I do not remember doing it. The house had learned my hands. The house had learned my voice. And whatever learned next would learn how to be me. I tried everything I could think of to break the pattern. I left the lights on, and I left them off. I packed a bag and walked to my truck, the gravel hissing beneath my shoes like a small, eager animal. I drove with the windows down, even though the cold cut through my jacket, because the world outside felt more honest than the walls that had started to whisper. For a while it worked. The road unrolled, and the radio sputtered static that felt like a conversation with strangers. I believed I had outrun it. Then I stopped at a red light and checked the rearview mirror. There was a face behind me in the back seat, pressed into shadow. The same hollows under the eyes, the same small scar at the lip. At first I thought someone had climbed in, some lonely hitchhiker I had failed to notice. Then the face turned its head the way I had always turned mine, the motion so exact between the shoulders that I felt nauseous. Its mouth moved, and the syllables were mine. I didn't remember driving home. I remember the smell of smoke, the vague stinging in my nostrils, and the sight of my cabin framed by night, a rectangle of light leaking from every window like a wound. The porch steps were charred, the railing half collapsed. Inside, the house was awake and laughing without sound. Pictures on the wall swam. The camera from the cellar sat on the table like an offering, its lens still warm. There were people there, or copies of people. The neighbor sat in his chair with his head turned toward the window, eyes too wide and blank. The dog lay by the hearth, panting softly. In its throat, a small human sound pulsed like a metronome. They were not quite right. Their movements ran a beat behind thought, as if someone were pushing them through a hand-cranked toy. When I reached out to touch the neighbor's shoulder, my hand passed through with a static sting, and his face rippled like oil. The thing that terrorized me did not stay outside my skin. It learned to borrow me. At the center of the living room, under a halo of dim light, stood a mirror I had never owned. In it, I did not see the person I had been 2 weeks before. Tired, thin, with the neat callus on my thumb from years of working a pen. In the glass, my reflection smiled first, and then the smile widened into something whose teeth were too many and too small. My reflection tipped its head and mouthed exactly 3 words. "Look behind you." I spun. The doorway held a figure that unfolded like a photograph developing in reverse. It stepped forward and the house exhaled, the sound a long, satisfied click. I had thought escape was a motion across distance. Escape, I learned, had always been a matter of being recognized last. They pressed something into my hand, the little photograph taken of me while I slept. On its back, where the date had been, there was instead a single sentence, written in my own cramped script. I can't help you anymore. Now it knows how to be me.
Subscribe to more story bars.